No, no buzz. Just Bees Book Club. Um, I think this is my number one surprise of the year, and I'm kind of breaking one of the fundamental premises of No Buzz by doing it, because the one of the secrets, aside from the one I say semi frequently, of course, is a Just Bees Book Club. Just Bees, only bees allowed, etc., etc. One of the fundamental premises of No Buzz, I think it was last time it came up was probably in the What Riley Wore video, is that this is a when I finish a book, I have to do a video about it. It's like one of the fundamental building blocks of how I conceptualize this project as, a personal journal, art thing, critical revelation, critical project. Let's just say art project, critical art project. And one of the reasons for that, of course, is that I didn't want to do shit on books that I didn't finish. But I haven't read My Affair with Art House Cinema by Phillip Lopate cover to cover. And I don't think I'm gonna finish it, but I like it a lot from what I've read, and I've read a bunch of stuff that I don't know anything about. I think I just picked out, David Lynch chapter, Tarkovsky chapter, blah blah blah. I've read about Jean and Luc Dardenne, who I didn't know. I had heard the name before. Bunch of folks that I'll get into or not as I go along. So technically, this is I think the first No Buzz book that I didn't read cover to cover, excluding footnotes in nonfiction things and technicalities as such. It's a whole new fucking world, huh? Philip Lopate seems to be a general film critic who also does other things. So his bio says he's written a couple novels, definitely written other kinds of reviews. This book is a collection of stuff, I want to say from like the mid to late 90s up until like the mid 2010s. It's a collection of pieces that relate in some way to art house cinema. The smaller directors who are not household names, with a couple of exceptions. Of course, there's a review of an academic book about Kurosawa in here that I think is really actually very good. And a couple of other there's a thing about John Ford, who obviously was not an art house director in his time, but as Lopate puts it out there, Ford sort of fits in here because the only place you would see him in the cinema at this point would be in literally an art house cinema. So it's not art house cinema as genre necessarily, but like the kinds, but art house cinema as a location of sorts, right? As a physical descriptor of like the kinds of movies you would have seen in his 50 or whatever years as a critic, in the art house cinemas of his time. A lot of these are Criterion Collection little blurbs, basically, 2 pages, handful of things that are longer essays that I'll get into a little bit more. Essays for Film Comment and Cineast, and I think there's like 1 or 2 Sight and Sounds in here. But like sort of that milieu. And I think I requested a comp of it because I was like, it was just like it sounds interesting. And then I left it on my shelf forever. And then I picked it up and I read the first 2 pieces, which are chapter 1 on changing one's mind about a movie, and chapter 2 how I look at movies. And they sort of, I guess, important to say, even though we're all bees here, I had never heard of Philip Lopate before in my life. I had never read anything by him, had never encountered him in the wild, as far as I know. Like I may have read something by him, but I did not know his byline. And yeah, so those the first two chapters are sort of like some things he wrote, sort of orienting the reader towards his own sense of his own taste and sort of position within. He doesn't say this explicitly, but sort of his position within the sort of film theory slash review world. And I think what it was specifically, because I was gonna say I kind of dug him, but what it really was like I was like, oh, I'm much younger than this person, but we do have like a sort of similar entry point into loving cinema, not just like literally with folks like Godard, but theoretically through folks like Godard, and like it was one of those things where it's like, oh, I bet I agree with you a lot and really, really strongly disagree with you, in ways that I, even though I don't articulate them, I would have fun thinking about them. And so I started flipping through the random little sections, because then he also establishes in the introduction, that the sort of second part of this book, the first part is called Curtain Raisers, just those two essays. The second part is just called Feature Films, and it's chapters 3 through 49, with titles such as Sidney Lumet, Long Day's Journey into Night, David Lynch, Mulholland Drive, Kenji Mizuguchi, Ugetsu and Utamaro and His Five Women, Elaine Renee, The Middle and Late Renee. I never actually said Alan Renee's name out loud. Eric Romer, La Collectionneuse, The Marquise of O, and Le Rayon Vert. Chapter 45, Alexander Sokurov. So things like that. So it's very specific reviews of movies. And you may have noticed, if you're particularly keen-eared, that I was going through them, just sort of skipping stuff, but they were all alphabetical, because that section is just literally ordered by, like, alphabetically by director. Let's see. Paul Fejos, Lonesome, Emmanuel Finkiel, Voyages, John Ford, The Sun Shines Bright, Jean-Luc Godard, Breathless and Band of Outsiders, Hong Sang-so, Hu Sha-shin, Otar Yoseliani, Elia Kazan. So, it's a part of why I haven't read it cover to cover, because it's literally organized in such a way where it's just like, just flip around, dog. Then there's the section called Intermission, Documentaries and Essay Films, which is, I haven't read most of it, but what I have read is like the best parts of this, I think. We'll get to that. And then then there's film critics, where he has essays about Roger Ebert, Pauline Kael, Stanley Cavell, James Harvey, Jonathan Baumbach. And then there's Exit Music, A Few Last Thoughts, which is repertory movie theaters, ravishing revivals, and conclusion, The Faith of a Cineast. Yeah, so I sort of flipped around, and then when I was going through stuff, that's what the book looks like. And that's what I look like. I took some notes the other night, because, like I said, this is, like, in my top 10, and I haven't read, like, film criticism in fucking ages. And actually, it's maybe a useful thing to say, but I literally, like a month ago, I started listening to Bell Hooks' book Reel to Reel, which is a collection of some of her film criticism, and then I forgot about it, and then today I finished listening to another book while I was out doing errands, and so like maybe I should jump back into that, having recently finished my Affair with Art House Cinema and being sort of in a better place, I guess, in terms of like thinking about film in a way that I love to do but haven't done in a while. And I think Reel to Reel is full of very, very good essays, and then that it's doing very important work. But it's also, I mean, Hooks opens it with a sort of thought about film and the pedagogy of film, and talks about how part of the reason she wrote it is because she would be teaching, and people would be like, I don't get this concept. And then she'd be like, well, what about in this popular movie? And they'd be like, oh, yeah, when this and that happens. And they're just applying the theory without thinking about it in the way that, like, film sort of fits in the classroom. Hooks' Reel to Reel is very much focused on ideology and representation. Hooks is like fucking bell hooks. So obviously she is problematizing the questions of representation. That she's very, very clearly thought out that it's not a hashtag representation matters book. It is a, what do we do with that? What is it? When is it good? When is it useful? How does it affect the world? So like all it's a very interesting book and very good from what I've listened to so far. But that is not the level at which I personally approach film, period. There are obviously things, but like, you know, I will, if there's a student riot in a film, I'm going to probably like it more than if there isn't, right? Silly personal stuff like that. But Lopate is much more interested in a formal analysis of the films, and he talks about how, like, he knows this about himself, and he knows that he can't be just one of those professors. Basically, I think he says in the intro, he's like, I don't want to just be one of those professors who just pauses the film every fucking frame and then just describes the frame to you, even though that's kind of what I want to do. So he imagines he tends to sort of touch on formal things, on cinematography, very good about like referencing the cinematographer. Questions of lighting and architecture and set design and stuff like that are very much constantly on his mind, on top of mind. But he's also finds himself reaching for like questions of character psychology. Why, not like why do people do this thing, but are these people drawn fully as you know, individuals, and where they fit into the sort of societal structure, and that is just so much more how my brain go, and much more what I think about when I'm watching a movie, which is again another reason why when I read the opening I was like, I'm gonna get mad about some of this, huh? Which is not really. I didn't really get mad about any of his essays. I fucking disagree with some of them. I don't think Lost Highway is Lynch's best movie. He basically thinks it's a piece of shit, and he's just objectively wrong about that, of course. But yeah, yeah. So okay, I feel like that's good preamble, and I'm gonna return to my little notebook. Okay, the first note I have is from page 65, which shockingly is on the George Clooney film Good Night and Good Luck. A movie that I saw, and I remember like kind of liking at the time, but I didn't really know what the fuck was anything. Let's see. Yeah, just this paragraph. Okay, so reading from My Affair with Art House Cinema by Phillip Lopate. Robert Elswit's sure cinematography eschews high contrast, giving us instead a spectrum of gray tonalities that matches the grainy texture of the kinescopes and picks up the smudged, smoky swirls of that unapologetically nicotine-addicted era. The 50s have often been characterized as a gray period, morally a scoundrel time, and sartorially, parenthetically, gray flannel suits, conformist. The film's decision to emphasize that limited palette, letting glints of courage or integrity shine forth the more splendidly from a neutral corporate milieu. Often the ostensible light source, such as a desk lamp, is placed within the frame, casting half of Murrow's face in shadows. At other times, characters' features are flattened under fluorescence. No interior is warmed by sunlight. And I picked that out just as a, like, you know, that's sort of indicative of the things where I read that and I go, oh yeah, those were choices that were made and that like affect the whole thing. um, yeah, and so that's where when I'm reading Lopate, I'm just like, yes, 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 and that's also where if I was reading him and I had seen the movie more recently or watched it after reading it, I might be like, you full of shit though. Uh, but I haven't, and I like that. I like a strong claim, right? I like a an argument to be made, and I like especially like it when that argument is about the aesthetic contours of a film and how those intersect with the whole of it, right? Okay, the next thing I'm going to read is a big ass, a whole page, a whole one of these pages. This is from John Ford, The Sun Shines Bright. Um, in 1953, John Ford directed The Sun Shines Bright, his paean to the traditional South. Throughout his career, Ford utilized the South frequently as a trope for authentic folk America. It should be noted, however, that Ford was born and grew up in Maine, which is as far north as you can get in these United States. When he arrived in Hollywood, Alaska's more north. When he arrived in Hollywood with his brother, the actor Francis Ford, one of his first jobs on the set was as an extra, a hooded Ku Klux Klan writer in Griffith's The Birth of a Nation. I don't want to make too much of this curious fact, only to say that there is a direct link between Griffith's whitewashing and nobling treatment of the South around the period of the Civil War and Ford's sympathy for the defeated region. Many of John Wayne's performances in Ford movies, most famously The Searchers, feature him playing a disillusioned, embittered Confederate soldier returning to the post-war South. Ford was not unique in this regard. From the silent era until the desegregation battle of the 60s, Hollywood had lopsidedly condoled the loser of the Civil War, giving the South a free pass for its support of slavery and equating its plantation culture with gallantry and romance. We might charitably surmise that stories of defeat and underdog rebound tend to generate more dramatic sympathy than those of winners. Certainly, Ford's deepest lyrical genius came into play when he evoked loss and mortality, so it is not entirely surprising that he should have found in the defeated South a perfect setting for his preoccupations. And then I'm going to read so that's the opening to this essay on John Ford's final movie, or not his final movie, but his favorite movie, I guess. I jumped the gun a little bit there. John Ford is on record as having said The Sun Shines Bright was his favorite of all of the films he ever made. This pronouncement has provoked much head-scratching on the part of Ford's scholars. Some have willed their way into seeing it as his great masterpiece. I think it good, but not great. Others have dismissed the remark as mischievous slyness on the part of an old fox. Clearly, Ford liked the film in part because he was able to indulge himself mightily, ignoring the usual requirements of a Hollywood feature for attractive young leads and a snappy pace. He even co-produced it, though it was hacked up a bit by the studio on its initial release. But his personal preference for The Sun Shines Bright must also have been because it was the last time he would be able to recreate a Southern idyll just exactly as he wanted it. A sweet, static place where chivalry and decency continued to hold their own. The year before, he had directed and co-produced The Quiet Man, so it was as if he were taking one last victory lap around his two idyllic, mythical kingdoms, Ireland and the Southland. The Old South, for him, embodied emotion, blood loyalty to tradition, instinct, simple enjoyments, including corn liquor, the darkies singing spirituals. It stood in opposition to mercantile civilization, hustle and bustle, and cold, calculating intellectuality. Ford's South was a place that would have had no use for me, yet, such is the power of the movies, I found myself enchanted spending 90 relaxed, cloistered minutes there. I did wonder, however, if such a film could ever have been made by a native Southerner. My gut instinct tells me no. The real South may still have its echoes of chivalry, decency, or folly, but to one born and raised there, the setting could not be so idealized. Its complexities would have had to be registered, if not honored. Yeah, I think I quite like that. I didn't like saying that word particularly. I forgot that was in there. Um, yeah. I mean, I understand where it's coming from, right? using the language of the time and of the filmmaker specifically. But I think this is another thing that I really appreciated about the Lopate book. It is it is not a political book. Um, he's not engaging in psychoanalytic or Marxist readings of things most of the time. He clearly has some of those chops, but it is primarily an engaged in a question of aesthetic criticism, right? Um, and I genuinely appreciate that because I like to hear about what thing looked like and how that sort of synthesized. I obviously am a Marxist critic. Have been, continue to be, question mark. I don't know. I'm doing this shit, right? Um, and I don't know. There something about the way that he handles Ford's, fucking antebellum like obsession is, I think, like a very keen reading of what's going on there. Um, and I think that last line is like a pretty solid supposition that the reason his idealized South, or like pre-war South, works on some like fundamental level for people who are not uh, fucking Confederate losers, is because of his actual distance from that world and time, because he only ever knew it through representations himself, perhaps, that he never got to, that he can't even really portray the truth of it, right? I don't know. It's I think Lopate does like a pretty good job handling a lot of stuff. Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna do Rashomon next. Page 165. Important to note, I've never actually watched Rashomon all the way through. I don't think, unless I have. Do Visceral was Kurosawa's word for what he was going after. No wonder the new Hollywood princes, Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, and Steven Spielberg, embraced Kurosawa as their master. He was employing a propulsive rhythm and impulse to entertain, more in keeping with Hollywood films and far removed from the contemplative, transcendental style that had been the hallmark of Japanese cinema. And there's like a handful of things in there that I sort of noted. Um, uh, it's much. I feel like it's much. If that sentence sounds much less racist if you think of transcendental cinema as specifically a theorization that Paul Schrader did of world cinema at a period when he was sort of trying to move through a particular movement. But like on its own contemplative transcendental style. Sounds so much like a Orientalist phrasing, and I bet there's some of that in there to begin with. In Schrader, I've not actually read his book. I also noted that that the order of the new Hollywood directors is interesting. Sorry, princes. Scorsese, Coppola, Lucas, and Spielberg. Because when I think of Kurosawa, I of course think you put Lucas first because he ripped him off the hardest. But that's not necessarily how one lists things, right? And I just like couldn't quite figure out Scorsese, then Coppola, then Lucas, then Spielberg, like what the ordering sort of signifies, whether consciously or unconsciously. And that's just like, again, this is like why I dig this sort of discussion of books, right? Or books of cinema, because that's that I will fixate on like ordering them in that order was a choice, in the same way that lacking any sunlight in Good Night and Good Luck was a choice. And what is it? What is it? What effect does it have? And I didn't come up with an answer because I didn't think about it for that long, but it was fun. And then the other thing about this Kurosawa one, where he has like some really interesting discussion of Kurosawa. This is a review of Kurosawa's Rashomon, A Vanished City, A Lost Brother, and the Voice Inside His Most Iconic Films by Paul Anderer. This is actually a review of a... I guess I was assuming it was a academic text, but it sounds more... and it's for the New York Times in 2016, but I guess that actually sounds more like a popular press like biography now that I've read the thing. Cool. I wanted to talk about his Mulholland Drive one, but I don't actually. So I want to get to the end. I don't have any quotes for these ones, but within the intermission section that I mentioned before, which is called Documentaries and Essay Films, there are two discussions of essay films specifically. Chapter 59 is called Mark Rappaport's Essay Films, and Chapter 61 is called City Essay Films. I'm not going to quote from it directly. These are the essays. I had not heard of Mark Rappaport before. These are the things that took me from kind of curious and enjoying Lopate's perspective on specific films and or directors and or books about directors or whatever it is, and made me get it, I think. So he has this conception called essay films that I had never heard of before because I'd never heard of Lopate before, as I had discussed already. And he's like he's fairly strict with what he counts. It specifically has to be a film with like a strong voice, like where an individual has a strong voice where they are discussing things with you. So he's like excluding things like, I think Man with a Movie Camera is one of the ones he explicitly says isn't an essay film because you don't have somebody directly addressing the viewer. And I, on a whim, read the Mark Rappaport one and was like, oh, I gotta see some shit this dude did. And I have watched, there's one of his like 10-minute shorts that I guess will be in the thing at the end here, like right over here probably. I don't actually know if that's true, but I'm going to try to remember to do that. It was really good, and yeah, it's like a sort of direct address film, and Rappaport specifically, I guess, was a film editor for a long time before he started making his own things, and he comes at it with a movie or essay film about Rock Hudson, whose title is escaping me at the moment. And then like his next one is about Jean Seberg, the girl in Breathless. You know, Jean Seberg. I've heard people say that before. And it just sounds really interesting and also extremely funny, especially the Mark Rappaport one. Because it sounds like the dude was like in the late 80s, early 90s, fucking making YouTube essay videos before all you clowns are out here doing this shit, and like was doing it in a really interesting and actually like well researched way instead of like 95% of video essays on this fucking website. Don't get me wrong, I don't put any work into this. But yeah, it was just very funny sort of seeing the parallels between like these things, essay films that are clearly like deeply avant-garde and niche, are now like the bread and butter of a bunch of clowns on this website. Except for they don't have to actually do the work, you know. And then City Essay Films, he talks about like 6 movies focused on specifically cities that are also, you know, within this sort of genre that he's proposing. Um, Movies about like London and other places that all sounded just really interesting, and I really liked it. And I thought once I got to those two essays, I specifically was like, okay, so like Lopate isn't just like some dude who does some like good criticism for me specifically. Like he is a theorist of film as well as like a solid critic, who is sort of in his own way pushing into a deeper understanding of film in a way that like our hero, our mutual hero Jean-Luc Godard, um, was trying to do in the late 50s, early 60s, and that made me go from like, oh hey neat, a thing about a movie I'm like interested in or already know I enjoy or already know I dislike, um, to okay, what is he doing here as a whole? And the answer is he's reprinting a bunch of essays that he wrote over the course of 20 years, basically. But over the course of those 20 years, he I think genuinely pushing for a more nuanced understanding of cinema, and I really appreciate that. And I'm glad I found this book when I did, um, because my brain worked well enough to read most of it. So that's the first unfinished No No Buzz. Thanks for not watching.